Hello, everyone. I'm James Miller with the Nature Conservancy in Massachusetts. Welcome to our Nature Connects webinar with new Massachusetts State Director Deb Markowitz. This is the third in our Nature Connects series, which is meant to give you a chance to hear from and ask questions of some of our amazing staff working to conserve the lands and waters upon which all life depends. As I look at the names on my screen, I see a lot of folks who were here with us a week ago for a great conversation about the awakening of the forest in spring. I also see a lot of new names, and it's fantastic to see so many people here. Thank you very much for being with us. On March 2nd, the Nature Conservancy in Massachusetts welcomed a new state director for the first time in more than 20 years. As you might imagine, there was some nervous anticipation around that change. As we've gotten to know Deb Markowitz, though, and begin to work together, even in today's challenging and uncertain environment, that nervous anticipation has been transformed into straight up enthusiasm and excitement for the things that we think we can do together. Deb's experience is remarkable. She was elected 6 times as Vermont's Secretary of State. She also spent 6 years as the appointed Vermont Secretary of the Agency of Natural Resources. She's the founder of the Women's Leadership Initiative, dedicated to getting more women into public office. She's been a Vermont trustee of the Nature Conservancy, and she serves on the advisory board of the Georgetown Climate Center. Just one of many things that points to Deb's passion and expertise on the issue of climate change. I could go on, but I don't want to keep you from meeting Deb. So for today's program, Deb and I are going to talk for about 15 minutes to kick things off. During that time, please enter questions. We hope you'll have questions. You can enter them into the Q&A box on the bottom of your screen. After our initial conversation, we'll turn to your questions. A couple of quick housekeeping notes. Webinar attendees are muted. If you have any trouble with the webinar, any technical problems, then please reach out to us via chat and we will do everything we can to help you. If you have any trouble with the display on your screen, there is a pull-down menu at the top center where you should be able to choose a fit to window option, which likely will correct any problems that you have. So with that, thank you again so much for being here. And good morning, good day, Deb. Thank you and welcome.
Well, thank you so much. It's just so great to be here. I have to say, before we get started, it's amazing to have so many people participating in this webinar. We have over 120 people who signed up, but it looks like it's nearly 100 who are on, or I don't know, 90 or something. And it's a sign to me that, like, during this time of uncertainty and social isolation, it's important to have opportunities like this for us to connect and to remind ourselves that we're part of a larger community, and a community that's committed to making the world a better place. And so I'm really excited that we're doing this. Thank you, James and team, for putting this together.
We're excited to be doing it as well. And Deb, I guess maybe could you start by telling us all a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Well, let's see, I went to the University of Vermont for my undergraduate degree. I got a degree in philosophy. So for any of you who've got kids in college or grandkids and you're worrying about the philosophy degree, this is what you can do with it. I went to Georgetown Law School and then came back to Vermont. And I thought I was going to practice law, but after I had my children, I have 3 kids, when they were babies, I decided that I really wanted to work part-time for a while, and you couldn't do that at the time in a traditional law firm. So I ended up starting a law center for our state municipal association. And that's when I fell in love with communities and working with people in communities who are trying to make change, trying to make their communities better. And that experience led me ultimately to politics, where I ran for Secretary of State. And as you heard, I ran 6 times, won 6 times, and served for 12 years. And And that was an amazing experience. It was during the time of election reform. So I served at the time of that terrible Bush-Gore election. And I have to say, a point of pride is that in two of my elections, I was nominated by both the Republican and the Democratic parties. So while I'm a Democrat, I actually served as a Democrat/Republican for a number of years in office. And that was at a time when secretaries of state were still seen as pretty nonpartisan, and I certainly was proud of that. After 12 years, though, I decided I wanted to do something else, and I ran for governor. And I was in a very complicated primary, lost by just a few hundred votes, and then was appointed by the governor, the person who won, to be his Secretary of Natural Resources and Environment. And that's really how I got started in this work. It was just an extraordinary opportunity. I've always loved conservation, loved the environment. And in that role, I really got to see firsthand just how important the role of nature could play in solving problems in our communities and addressing these big environmental issues. And just 7 months in, the state was hit by Tropical Storm Irene. And you may remember 2011, it was a storm that just devastated the state. 225 of our 250 communities had infrastructure, public infrastructure that was destroyed, roads, bridges, homes washed away, businesses destroyed. And so that really put me front and center in a national and international conversation about climate change. And climate has been my passion ever since, looking both at mitigation as well as resilience and adaptation. And it's been extraordinary. I was involved in the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative and on the board of the Transportation Climate Initiative on the mitigation side, and on the resilience side, I was lucky enough to serve on the White House Task Force on Climate Preparedness and Resilience, where my particular focus was on nature-based solutions, on bringing nature to the table when we were thinking both about mitigation and adaptation.
Deb, when you first heard about the state director's position for the Nature Conservancy was going to be open, what made you say that's the thing for me? This is the time and the place?
Well, I have to say, I had just fallen in love with the Nature Conservancy in my prior role. There was no organization out there that brought the power of science, thinking at a global scale and then acting on a local scale. And so I just saw how important the Nature Conservancy was as we were recovering from Tropical Storm Irene, as we were thinking about on a landscape scale how nature could be part of the solution when we're addressing climate change. And so I had been working in Boston at a wonderful organization called Ceres. It's a very powerful non-governmental organization that leverages our biggest asset owners, asset managers, pension funds to engage companies to become more sustainable and to align with the goals of the Paris Climate Accord. Really great organization. I was the head of programs overseeing climate and energy and deforestation, water programs, great programs. And so I wasn't really looking for a job, right? I was happy in Boston doing my thing. But I kept getting people sending me the job description, and I realized these jobs are generational, right? My predecessor was here, for 25 years or so. I mean, a long time, and they don't open up very often. And while I love the work I was doing at Ceres, there is nothing in the world as wonderful as working in an organization where, again, you've got the power of science, thinking globally, but actually getting things done on the ground. And so I just couldn't pass it up. It's a once in a lifetime opportunity. So I was thrilled when I was chosen. I'm really honored and thrilled, and I'm excited to be part of the team.
Well, we're very glad that you didn't pass it up, and grateful to the people who reached out to share that posting with you. Deb, what's at the core of it all for you? What's your you have, there's so much passion and energy, but what motivates you?
So, when we think about, for each of us, like every single person, I would bet on this, on this program who's watching this webinar, has a passion for nature, has a passion for the environment and the planet. Otherwise, you wouldn't be listening in, right? And so the question is, where does that come from? And for me, it started in childhood. I'm Jewish. That's my background, and I was raised in a family that took serious the idea that, in Judaism, the question, why are we here? The answer is tikkun olam. It means to heal the world. And so I was raised with this issue, this value that our role is to do our part to make the world a better place, to heal the world. And so I've taken that seriously my whole life. It's been my driving motivator. And I was lucky enough to find a husband who, incidentally, like I'm a Markowitz, he's also a Markowitz, not related. So we're the Markowitz family, but he also shared that value. Oh, there he is. I see, you can see some slides. Isn't he lovely? And we raised 3 children together with those values. And it is the driving force. And for me, there is nothing so important as addressing climate change and thinking about how do we use nature to solve these really pressing environmental issues, public health issues, clean drinking water, sustainable food. How do we, as we urbanize, how do we make sure that in our urban environment, everyone gets the benefit of nature? Environmental justice, climate justice is just front and center for me. And how do we think about protecting land and nature, land and waters for habitat, so we can make sure there's that our species, that we won't face the kinds of extinctions that we're afraid of, right? That species can migrate with climate change over time. And anyway, so that's my driving passion, is this idea of tikkun olam. What can I do to make the world a better place? And I've been so blessed in my life to have the opportunity to play leadership roles that can make a difference.
You mentioned, to heal the world, and you took over as State Director on March 2nd, and I think eight days or so into that, you were in the position of sending out a message to all staff saying that we should be beginning to work from home due to the emerging COVID-19 pandemic. It seems like it's been so much more than 3 weeks. I'm curious, can you talk a little bit about the experience of coming into your position and having this emerge so quickly, and maybe what you've learned from it?
Yeah, so this is just an extraordinary time for all of us. It really isn't business as usual. And one of the things that I learned during the response to Tropical Storm Irene is that in times like this, it really is people first, right? You have to think about the human beings involved. And, it means the staff, their families, their loved ones. It means all of the people who are part of the TNC family. So my top priority was making sure that people are safe. And, the work will continue. We've got a very, very professional staff, but in the first instance, we need to do everything we can to make sure that people are safe. And there's been, this is an unprecedented situation, like we know that, and it's been so gratifying to be part of the Conservancy. It's, across the Conservancy, leadership is putting the health and well-being of staff front and center. We're thinking about how do we get our work done remotely, and the show does go on. I mean, there are a lot of things we can continue to do, but there are hurdles. And as a leader, I need to think about with my team, how do we help make it possible for our staff members to succeed given the current environment? And, we've got people who are at home with small children. We've got people who are home with older children or have aging family members that they're concerned about. And so for the moment, it's time for us to really take care of each other. And so I'm spending a lot of time thinking about that. How do we build community? How do we make sure that despite the fact that we've got social isolation, that we don't actually have real isolation, that we're really we have opportunities to connect. And thank goodness we've got the ability to do webinars and to do Zoom and Skype and lots of ways that we can continue to work together.
Yeah, and I think I speak to say that the internal response for the Nature Conservancy has been very comforting, I think, for me and many others. I mean, that support in this really, as you said, it's an unprecedented situation. And one aspect of that situation that we're facing has, I think, highlighted the way in which we're all connected, and also the ways in which we're connected to nature. And so I segue a little bit to kind of the role of nature for you. I'd love to hear a little bit about the role of nature in your life. And, you shared a story with us that I love, and I feel sure that people here would enjoy it as well.
Well, I would bet that everybody on this webinar has experienced the restorative power of nature. You going out into the woods or on the water or at the ocean, and instantly we can feel the health benefits, right? Our blood pressure goes down, our stress kind of releases, and that is really true now more than ever, right? At this moment, touching nature. And there's this I love the whole forest bathing movement. If you haven't heard about it, you should Google it. It comes out of Japan, a really interesting idea. But we've known about that already, right? In the Nature Conservancy, the power of actually the research shows that you don't even have to walk in the woods to get the benefits. You can just look at a screensaver of the forest, or look out a window at the ocean, or hear it, and it makes a difference. And so that has always been the case for me. And I think the story you want me to tell is a story I told actually when I was a trustee in Vermont. My very first volunteer leader summit, which, if you don't know, is a wonderful convening of trustees and leadership from across the Conservancy in DC, where we would get together and talk, and then go and educate our congressmen and women. And I offered to speak, and unbeknownst to me, I was like it's like a TED Talk. You're on this big stage with a big screen behind you, and I was asked to tell about the power of stories to help convince people of change, and in terms of policy, how you can use stories. And coming down, I was thinking about my own stories about the power of nature, and the importance of having natural places available for people. And Paul and I, my husband and I, have been together for more than 30 years, and we've got 3 children. They're now adults, but raising a family, no matter how wonderful your marriage is, it's not always sunshine and roses, right? There's hard times, and especially when the kids are little, it can be very challenging. And I remember I remember the importance of getting outside to our marriage at the time. And what we would do is, when things were rough, we would take a walk in a woods near us. And in Vermont, there was a particular mountain nearby that we would hike. And we would find that, we would go in and we'd be mad at each other and sniping and processing. But by the time we were coming down, we remembered why we were together and what we had in common. And it really, I'm sure many of you have experienced something like this in your relationships. And it was really funny, because just the week before I was giving this talk, we happened to hike up this mountain, Hunger Mountain. And on our way down, for the first time ever, I noticed this big wooden sign. I can't imagine how I had ever missed it before. And it said, this property was conserved by the Nature Conservancy. And so the Nature Conservancy saved my marriage, right? Going into nature was a much easier way to process things than therapy, and it worked. And so, so that's a story, my go-to story of the power of nature to heal and give back to us, and the beauty, the peace, the exercise, the health. And, it's just one of those co-benefits of investing in nature, I would say.
Yeah, we talk a lot about co-benefits, but that one really rings, resonates. That is the story. So Deb, we're getting starting to get a few questions, so I will move to those, I think. And first is actually not a question, but a welcome from Jack Clark, the Public Policy and Government Relations Director at Mass Audubon.
That's great.
Looking forward to continuing our close working relationship.
Well, I look forward to meeting you as well. There are so many people in the environmental and conservation community in Massachusetts who've been doing such great work for so many years, and I'm very excited to become part of the community. Right now, I think we've got a tremendous opportunity as a conservation community to really lead. This is a difficult time, and nature has always been our ally during difficult times. We know that. And, although like right now we're keeping social distance, we can also keep nature close. And this isn't a bad time to remind people of that and the role of nature. It's also, I'm an optimist, and I would bet my colleagues who are leading similar organizations are also optimists. I believe that coming out of this crisis, we will be changed as a world. And I think the reason that we'll be changed is, if you think about it, this is an experience, a direct experience for all of us, that what happens in China or Iran or Italy impacts us. We're all one world. We're interconnected. And that's one side of it. But the real remarkable thing about this moment that gives me tremendous optimism is that the first time in my lifetime, we are making a decision to sacrifice, personal sacrifice, for the benefit of the community. Like my kids who are 20 somethings, the millennials, they are socially isolating, not for themselves, but for grandpa and grandma, for me and you, for people they know who have conditions that make them more vulnerable to the disease. That is remarkable. It's a moment of time of community altruism where we're making real sacrifices in our economy, in our communities for each other. When we come out of this, we will be changed. And my hope, my optimistic hope, is that we'll be changed in a way that allows us to really lean in and scale solutions on climate change, on environmental sustainability, on poverty, on economic justice, on climate justice, on all of those big issues that we face in the globe. If we can do this, we can certainly do that as well.
Yeah, it's an inspiring perspective, Deb, and I share it. We have a couple of questions that are a little similar, so I'm going to kind of fold them together, and it has to do with, can you give us a sense of maybe what are some of the things that you see as maybe new focuses or initiatives for the Massachusetts Conservancy over the next few years?
Yeah, well, so understand, I've only been here 3 weeks, right? So, I'm still learning about all of the rich work that we're doing and have been doing historically, but I'm coming in believing that everything is touched by climate change. Every single thing we do, all of our work ties back into a climate change frame. And, for example, we have this amazing project with oyster farms. And I don't know how many of you have heard of it. We've got a great little video on our website, I believe, right, James, that folks could look at to learn more about it. But what's amazing about this project is it demonstrates the co-benefits of nature when you use nature as a solution. So one of the things that I know as somebody who ran an environmental agency is we're having more problems right now with nutrient pollution in our waterways, because in the Northeast, one of the impacts of climate change is we're having more intense storms and more rainfall. And so that's washing more pollution off of the landscape into our waters. In fresh water, the real problem is phosphorus, and salt water, it's nitrogen. And so we're having nitrogen pollution problems in our bays and in our estuaries and so forth. And shellfish is nature's pollution filter. And to the extent that we lose shellfish, that, you know, it means that there is more pollution that has more impact on the ecosystems in our seas and bays. And so the oyster farm project is really about sustainable food, right? It's about working with the oyster farmers, the people who rely on this for their livelihoods, to create farms and then demonstrate that it also provides ecosystem services for fishery. Like, it brings in other fish species and actually enhances the ecosystem where it's being built. And so I think that's like the perfect example of the win-win-win of nature-based solutions. So we're going to improve the water quality where we have these farms. We create livelihood and sustainable food. And, you know, with the growing population in the world, having sustainable food, seafood, is really a wonderful thing. It's sustainable livelihoods for the people who rely on this. And then it creates great habitat for fish. So I want to look at everything we do from that frame. How do we scale this impact? So we've got this little pilot project, but what does that mean for the world? And that's actually the magic of the Nature Conservancy, and why I'm here, is that we can pilot a program here with all of these multiple benefits to nature and make a demonstration project that then can be scaled across the world. Because the problem we're facing here is not so different than the problems they're facing everywhere else. And, you know, so that's what excites me. I'm going to be looking to hear from staff and from friends and trustees about, you know, where do you think we can have the biggest impact? You know, what's the special, you know, what is the special opportunities that we have in Massachusetts to add value regionally, nationally, globally?
Deb, thank you. And I let everyone know that, excuse me, there is a link to the video that you referenced in the chat right now. And we'll also send out a follow-up message after this webinar, and we'll be sure to include a link there too. It really is a dynamic and project with a lot of interesting contours. So another question, Deb, some commentators are saying, get us back to business as usual and worry about the environment later. In other words, a status quo. Why not use this pandemic as an inflection point in how we live and work? What do you think about this? And I think you've tackled that a little bit, but maybe revisit that.
Well, I think this will. I think this pandemic will help us see that we can have convenings by Zoom, and it works, and it's okay. And maybe those of us in the environmental movement, you know, don't need to be flying all over the world for meetings. Maybe there's a better way to do it. And so I think that the kinds of sacrifices we're making now will end up feeling more comfortable with some of them, you know, some of the different ways of being. And, you know, I already am seeing a robust conversation in civil society about what this will mean for, you know, when we're out of our houses, you know, how can we take lessons from this to jumpstart and scale what we needs to happen because of climate change and some of these other world challenges. You know, it's going to be interesting to see what happens with the economy as well, and what we need to do to get back on track. And there's been a lot of conversation about, you know, we're beyond, there's a limit to growth, right? We're beyond this idea of manifest destiny, that we can keep growing and keep taking and using natural resources, that we're at the tipping point where now it's really about conserving and thinking about how to right size our lifestyles and right size our thoughts about this unlimited growth ethos. And I think there'll be an opportunity to reboot, but it'll be complicated, right? Because there's always a variety of interests and a variety of leadership approaches. You know, I think we'll be able to learn from Canada. We'll be able to learn from France. There'll be places that will lead on this, that we'll be able to really learn from.
Deb, what do you see as the role of local nature in Massachusetts in addressing the two great global issues of climate change and biodiversity loss?
Well, we have, there's a fellow who works in the region. Actually, I apologize, Mark Anderson, if you're actually the North America region, as opposed, like I'm new enough so I don't know what region, if it's North America or if it's New England, but he's brilliant. That's all I can say. And he talks about nature's stage. And when I was a trustee in Vermont, he came in and came and talked to us and showed us maps that were so compelling about the connection of on the landscape of open lands. And, the connection could be forest blocks. I mean, that's a very rich, biodiverse and important connection, but also waterways, right? The waters are also part of the connected landscape. And Massachusetts plays a critical role in allowing a migration of species. And understand with climate change, we know there will be change. We don't know the pace of change. We don't know what it's going to look like year to year. And so the goal, and what we've learned from Mark Anderson's work and his team, is that we need to think about nature as a stage for biodiversity. We're not quite sure what's going to be on that stage. And so we need to make sure that we have in place the kinds of connected and complexity in the landscape, connection and complexity in the landscape that we're prepared for whatever is going to come into the future. For that migration of species, for different kinds of ecosystems and different kinds of critters to survive. And so Massachusetts plays an important role. If you think about the western side of the state, we've got a lot of land development, but we've got forest blocks. And there are places that we need to focus on to fill in the gaps, to make sure that there's not a break in connection. And we can fill in the gaps in a couple ways. One is by actually conserving land, our traditional function as an organization, to say, okay, it's a patchwork quilt. Where's there a missing piece of the patchwork quilt that we need to fill in? And then we also need to be thinking about crossings. Like there's very creative ways to make sure that animals can cross over highways and get from one block to another, or between areas, precious areas. In the area near where I live, in Boston, sea level rise is happening faster on the East Coast in this area than anywhere in the world, as I understand it, and the waters are warming the fastest as well. And so we have a lot of work to do to think about climate resilience and how do we prepare for sea level rise. This is a place where we can think about climate justice. It's the poorer communities end up getting served last, and so how do we think about that? How do we think about some of our precious places like Martha's Vineyard, or some of the island communities? How do we use nature to help protect us? So I think Massachusetts plays a really important role. Policy is also an area that Massachusetts right now plays a really important role. And that's because we've got an administration that is making climate change a central goal of their addressing climate change, a central goal of their administration. We've got deep nonpartisan credibility, of deep relationships and nonpartisan credibility with the administration and the legislature, and so we can really have an opportunity to influence what happens, not just in Massachusetts, but with some of the very important regional efforts like the Transportation Climate Initiative and the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative as well.
You mentioned the, you mentioned the resilient, Mark Anderson-led Resilient and Connected Network initiative, which I think we're going to be talking about a lot this year. So we look forward to talking with people more about that topic. But there's a question that specifically, I think, connects to that. And the question is, are there plans at the Nature Conservancy to be working with land trusts across the state to share scientific expertise and help in both the preservation and stewardship of lands in light of climate change?
So the Nature Conservancy is always taking a leading role in this regard, and I think that's one of the biggest gifts that we offer, is that we got the scientific powerhouse of our of this global organization, and where we have a lot of relevant information for what we're doing right now here on the ground. So so yes, my expectation is that that we will continue to add value in Massachusetts by being a leading organization, science organization, helping local land trusts really focus on deals. And one of the things that I did in Vermont that I thought was really, well, I know is really effective. So after Tropical Storm Irene, I put together I convened all of the conservation organizations in the state to use the science that we had at the agency, which actually was informed by some of the information coming out of the Nature Conservancy. But we took a look at the map of Vermont and looked at where we as a state needed to focus our conservation dollars to build climate resilience in the state. And then we built some tools for the local land trust to be able to use, so that you can put in the area that you're looking at conserving and what some of the choices are, and you would get some information about whether or not that is a target, an area of priority in terms of building climate resilience. And if it was, we were able to help bring more money to the table to make that deal actually succeed, or more likely to succeed. So I think that's important. This is a time when we all need to be working together. There's a lot of work to do. We're seeing changes fast and furious on the landscape. There's also a generational opportunity where our landowners, particularly of forested landscape, are aging, and as they retire or perhaps leave their land to their successors, there is more risk in having that forest be converted. And keeping forests is like the #1 thing we could be doing for climate resilience, but also for climate mitigation. So thinking about this demographic moment of time where we've got this shift in ownership of these large blocks of land, this is a time when we really do need to be working together to prioritize where we're going to be focused for conservation.
Deb, another question. As you acclimate and consider how to chart the next steps, particularly given finite budget resources, and what's the process that shapes how we save the best of our legacy, the TNC's legacy work, and add environmental justice, climate solutions, and sustainable practices?
Well, I'm still early in, and my first step is going to be a listening tour. And I'm starting it already by Zoom and Skype, and I need to learn more about these legacy projects. And I have to say, this is also a moment in time where we need to be paying attention to climate justice and economic justice. And I think TNC has a very important role to play. We talked earlier on about all of these real benefits of nature, and they can't just be for rich people or rural people. We need to think about how, as we're planning, in Dorchester and, in Alston and in places and actually, you may not know it, but in New England, Boston, actually in the Northeast, I'd heard, and maybe don't quote me on this, but the Boston area is the fastest growing urban area in the whole Northeast. And given that that's the case, which I believe it is, we have this obligation as we're planning our communities to plan for nature, to think about climate resilience, think about climate justice. Urban tree programs are so important, but also thinking about using nature for managing stormwater pollution, and what that does when you put greenscapes in communities, how that really also improves public health. And so I have a lot to learn about Massachusetts and what we've done already, and before I really have an answer to that question about where we need to go. But I already know that it has got to be a priority.
Great, great. As I sit here in Dorchester, I
I
love
didn't even
hearing
know that.
So yeah, absolutely, it speaks to me. Question about your experience with Ceres and kind of understanding their mission. Do you see any benefit to collaborate with other environmental organizations, via things like youth service, environmental investment organizations, to bolster the impact of our message?
Absolutely. I just think more partnerships, the better, right? You know, if we're going to scale, I mean, these are huge problems we're facing, right? Huge challenges. And we're only going to achieve our goals if we're working together. And, you know, in working with Ceres, I really saw the power of the private sector to scale change, right? You know, there's one thing for us to do a pilot project with oysters. There's another thing when one of the big seafood buyers says, hey, we're only going to buy sustainable oysters, right? That scales action. Our role is to have the science to show that, you know, what success could look like with sustainable seafood. And then is there an opportunity to partner with one of those companies to say, okay, now this is the way it's got to be if you're going to sell to us, the big distributor. I mean, there's real power in these partnerships, and it's kind of exciting to think about because, you know, in Boston is a real center of commerce. There's a lot going on that we haven't really tapped, and so I'm looking forward to exploring that over the next couple of years as well.
Following on that, Deb, just kind of exploring that the relationship between the environment and business. You know, I think that traditionally there's been a sense of some tension between those things, and I'm curious from your vantage point. You know, do you see that having developed, and how do you see that having developed over time?
Well, look, one of the things we know, and I think coming out of this crisis, it'll be very obvious that businesses won't be successful if they don't address climate risk, if they don't think about water risk, right? You know, if like a Nestle's is not going to be successful if you can't grow chocolate where you're growing chocolate now, right? You know, cocoa plants where you're growing them now, or if there's not water for their bottling plants that are clean, and so I think there's an alignment of interest, and this crisis is demonstrating that we are all in it together. We are. The economy, human health, the environment, all there's an interdependence that is undeniable.
Really good question here that while we're building this important global climate response, how will TNC also work to maintain the crucial partnerships with local organizations and communities on the ground, including the invaluable local science that the Nature Conservancy has traditionally developed and provided?
Yeah, well, so I think that is, again, part of the magic of the Nature Conservancy, right? We're thinking globally, acting locally, and I don't think that changes. I think from a leadership perspective for me, I'm always thinking about ambition and scale. And in Massachusetts, ambition and scale starts with local science, local knowledge, communities, really understanding where we fit in the ecosystem of organizations, where we add the particular value. And then I think about, okay, once we figure out Massachusetts, how do we take that and scale it? Like, how do we share it, regionally? How do we share it across the country and the world? So but the starting point, it's that magic, global to local, local back up.
So it's been, as we've discussed, only a few weeks, but is there anything about...
and so to all the staff out there who's listening, if I've said anything that isn't right, please let me know.
No, how is there anything about your experience thus far or about the Nature Conservancy that has surprised you?
Well, I have been in the Nature Conservancy family as a trustee and of course a longtime member. And I guess I have been surprised at really what a strong community it is. It has been so gratifying coming in, and obviously I'm coming in during an unprecedented crisis, but everyone is really right there for each other. I have felt so supported from before I even started. I got phone calls and emails from people all over the country, welcoming me, offering me support or advice. And we've got this really close cohort in New England where I could just pick up a phone and call anybody. And in fact, I just got off of a Zoom call before this with my colleague Mark from New Hampshire, and that's been a wonderful surprise.
That's awesome. Yeah, absolutely. One other topic that's come up in some of our conversations is storytelling, and you've talked about why it's it's important to you, and I'm curious if you could talk a little bit more about that and maybe what you think the role of storytelling is in advancing conservation.
Yeah, well, there's been a lot of brain science that supports the idea that that people hear stories differently than, for example, science and statistics. And there's been a lot of research, in particular, thinking about like climate change and why it's been so difficult to get a sort of community consensus that climate change is here, it's an emergency, we need to do something about it. And in part, it's because, when we talk about, just the numbers and show the charts, that actually doesn't necessarily convince. That we're convinced by stories and connection. One of the, when we think about nature and the power of nature to help solve problems, it's the stories that resonate with us that really drive us to action. And I would bet that every single person who's on this webinar can think to the story that drove them to action. Was it going canoeing with your father as a kid? Was it when you were in the Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts and did a jamboree? Like, what was it for you that convinced you that this is one of your life's passion, to make the world a better place by protecting nature? And it is, we have so many stories of success. That is also where optimism comes from for me. There's a lot of optimism in nature. Nature is so resilient. We have so much to learn from watching nature and how it can bounce back and maybe be a little different after a storm, but in that difference, be able to withstand the next storm. And so I always look for the stories, and I'm actually, one of the things I'm excited about with Massachusetts is finding Massachusetts stories. What are the things, thinking about the Bay State culture, right? Like, I know an awful lot about the Red Sox. There's some resilient stories there, right? With the curse and sticking with it and seeing the response. But I'm looking forward to, and folks on this, folks out there, if you've got a story you want to share with me about resilience and nature and community, I'm really interested in hearing it.
I hope that people will take you up on that. I'm sure there are some fantastic and compelling stories among the folks who are on this webinar today. Deb, we've thrown a lot of really heady and some fairly tough questions in a lot of ways at you. I'm gonna give you like a little bit of an easier one. Massachusetts, specifically, are there natural places in Massachusetts that you've come to love over the years?
Oh, absolutely. So, I can think of, I'll tell you my 3 favorite places just right off the, right away off the, top of my head. One is, so my husband and I had our honeymoon in Nantucket, in Sconset, actually, on Nantucket. And so that's always going to hold a really, special place in my heart. But my go-to place has been Plum Island, and that whole area is just extraordinary. And if you haven't been there before, I recommend it. There's a wildlife management area that's got extraordinary birding, but it's right on the seashore, and you can see the murmurations if you're there at dawn or dusk, and that's when the birds come and they fly and they make these gorgeous designs as they flock and up and down in the sky, chasing bugs, I suppose. And but I recommend that. It's just a wonderful place. You can paddle. Paul and I like to go canoeing or kayaking, and it's just a beautiful spot. And of course, as our kids' favorite place would be Wellfleet, where we would go to the beach. And but the Berkshires, as a kid, was the go-to place for my family growing up. And it's such a beautiful landscape. The forest there, the fields, farms, the little villages. So Massachusetts has a lot to offer. And then, of course, I'm in Brookline, and I live right near Jamaica Pond, which is almost nature. So,
it's an important piece of nature in the city, right?
It's where I go walking.
Yeah, it's a very peaceful place considering its
exactly
location. Okay, so I guess I took us to an easy question, but we do have one more complex question, we'll say, that I'll throw at you. Interested in data and analysis having to do with climate change and fisheries management, as well as stories, but how will you continue to highlight and communicate the science?
Yeah, actually, you communicate science with stories. It's no different. One of the things I was able to do over the past, when I left, before I started series, after I left government, I worked for the Gund Institute of Ecological Economics at the University of Vermont, and did some work with an organization called Compass, which focuses on training scientists to communicate about science. And numbers are really important. It's important to have the graphs and really have a solid backing to what you're talking about. But ultimately, people hear the stories. They hear it in stories. And so I'll be excited to work with our scientists. We've got some great scientists in our chapter to think about what are the stories, how do we tell the stories of the fisheries, and what we're seeing now, where we need to be, and how we can get there, what we have to offer in terms of solutions. And but it does always come back to stories and bite-sized chunks. Scientists, in my experience, can make things really complex because they see the nuance. And the idea is to lift it to what do people really know? What's the important core pieces of information that will help inform action?
So Deb, I think we're about at the end here. And I guess just to say, is there anything that we haven't talked about that you'd like to touch on, anything you would like to add?
No, I guess my final words would be just a thank you to everybody who's on this webinar, who's part of the TNC community. It really is just such a pleasure to be joining you, and I'm excited to meet you, to work with you, to learn from you, and to scale our activities. I mean, this is a time when we are coming together in an unprecedented way. The world will change, and let's be ready to make sure it changes for the better, and that we all work together to make the world a better place for our children and grandchildren and future generations. So thank you, James. You've done a great job moderating and
I appreciate it.
Asking the questions. Didn't it feel really natural? Like we're just sitting.
We haven't had a chance to have this conversation yet. So I
know.
So, thank you.
So
and everyone, thanks again to everyone. I just echo Deb's thoughts. We're so grateful for you all joining us, particularly knowing it is a challenging time out there. Please stay in touch with us. Deb, you have a Twitter, I believe.
Yes, it's at Deb Markowitz. Feel free to follow. You'll see how early up I am in the morning if you get my tweets, and how late I stay up at night too. But.
We also have, of course, there's nature.org Mass, and then the Nature Conservancy in Massachusetts is on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And everyone, we will also be sending, you'll get a follow-up thank you from us, and we'll include the link to the aquaculture video and anything else that came up today. And again, thank you, wishing you all the best, and look forward to the next time we can talk. Okay. Bye, Deb.
Bye, thank you.